everybody. This is Steve Sabadeski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com, and today we're going to be talking politics and some breaking news. And I do see us on Twitter, so that's a good sign. We have Grant Stern, who is a gentleman that I've been following. He's very knowledgeable about much of just the craziness going on right now in Trump land. Grant is a mortgage broker. He's very conversant about everything, as far as I'm concerned, everything Trump writes for various. He's got his own website. Am I correct, Grant Stern? And
the sternfacts.com.
Okay, okay. And
you can go to grantstern.com also and find everything.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. There it is, grantstern.com. And so good morning to you. So what the heck is going on? It's been a crazy week.
Yep, it's been a week for the history books, and do not expect it. Do not expect it to get any better. The calendar dictates what's happening from here on out.
Okay. So what's on the calendar?
Well, let's talk about that. There's a lot of trials coming up. The trials and tribulations of Paul Manafort are about to eat the entire news cycle. So Donald Trump and team are working on doing a series of crazy things to try and deflect attention from that. If it wasn't for Donald Trump doing what he did with Putin this week, the entire focus of the news media would have, and probably still should have been, on the Aspen Security Conference. It's an annual conference. Everybody knows the date. And you would have seen a parade of senior American intelligence officials, current and former, going up onto the stage and saying, well, you know, you can't rule out Donald Trump being a knowing asset of Russia. Not very good headlines, right?
Sure.
On top of that, Paul Manafort goes on trial next Wednesday in Northern Virginia. Now, he executed what I would call a legal gambit by asking to be tried in both Virginia and D.C. since he had the right to be tried where the crimes were occurred. He figured, well, maybe that'll slow things down, you know, get two different judges, maybe you'll get some better luck. But what it's really done is actually extended everything. So now you're going to have a trial next week. It's going to end in mid-August. Then you're going to have another trial in mid-September after he gets convicted. Why do I say that? I'm a mortgage broker. I saw what he did with his paperwork. The emails are out. The Word documents are out. It's unquestionable that he committed mortgage fraud. And that's why Mueller filed these charges. They're called documentary charges. In other words, everything's about paperwork. They're just going to get some testimony and say, why'd you do it? And then he's going to plead the fifth a lot if he takes the stand in the end. But then looking ahead at the calendar, in October of this year, there's going to be a major civil trial in the state of New York. And the state of New York's governor already said he's looking at criminal charges. But all of this adds up to a bigger picture. You're a lawyer, right, Steve?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in law, there's a doctrine called collateral estoppel. Once you've litigated something, you can't go back and refight the same facts. Once those facts have been, you know, subject to a judgment, they're now considered established, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's what Donald Trump and company have done for years in all of these different court cases. They simply try to fight on establishing the facts, like try to keep the court from ever ruling that these facts are established. And by doing that, they keep all the questions open, right? And then they can lie and spin and make things up and try to, you know, extend the process. But what Mueller is doing and what's going on with law enforcement in general is that they're going to have these trials on very documented issues. Right. So it's not going to be a situation where they can argue a whole lot. And they're going to establish all of the facts. And that is going to prevent the Trump team from really escaping. Because once you've established all these facts in court, like a $2.8 million illegal in-kind donation from the Trump Foundation to the campaign, and the entire Trump family is part of the foundation board, right, well, you've got a problem. When you've established the fact that the Trump campaign had a Russian spy as the campaign manager, you've got a problem, you know? And the tax stuff is more like the same kind of pinch that they put Jack Abramoff in.
Now, the argument has been that this has nothing to do with Russia. I mean, this is his own business dealings. Yeah, I mean, he was chairman of the campaign, but in actuality, in terms of collusion, the argument is, who cares? It has nothing to do with the charge that Mueller has. Your response?
Well, that's a great argument when you want to lose and go to jail and then be able to say forever that you should be innocent of all the crimes you committed because you got caught for committing a different crime. Doesn't seem to me like it's really going to work. If you want to know if this is appropriate or not, and if it's going to work out or not, I think it's best to look at history. And when I say look at history, I'm talking about somebody who is involved with these very same people. His name is Jack Abramoff. And in 2006, from 2004 to 6, his life unraveled, and it ended with Republicans losing control of the House of Representatives in a pile of scandals for pedophilia, corruption. Numerous congressmen went to jail, and it's happening again. The way that the feds got to Jack Abramoff is precisely the same way that they're getting to Paul Manafort. And in Abramoff's case, they pinched him. They got him for faking a wire transfer for a $50 million deal. I mean, a really, that's a mortgage fraud, but to buy a boat, okay? The parallels are striking. They pinched him. Then he turned state's evidence, and he turned in the Congress people who he had compromised. Not all of them. And just to sum this up, because this is a very important part of my reporting, it's in thesternfacts.com. These things are connected. Like, Abramoff didn't happen, and then Manafort was out there on the other side of the world doing something else, and nobody cares. What happened is Abramoff gets pinched. He was actually working with a Russian oil company named Naftasib, okay? And he was putting Russian oil money into the Republican Party from the late 1990s until he got pinched in 2004. Well, Paul Manafort started right after Abramoff got picked up. Now, the timing is a lot less than coincidental, but what I'm going to tell you right now is probably going to surprise you. Naftasib, the company that Abramoff worked with, got purchased and got a new name. You now call it Rosneft, the company that's noted in the famous Trump-Russia dossier. Mm-hmm. So, the Russians are great at this. They get caught, and they'll move the shells around and say, okay, well, this is Rosneft. I mean, this couldn't be involved in any of this stuff, but it's well documented that Naftasib was very involved in the last scandal. Rosneft is the same company. They're involved deeply in this one. And we shall see. Obviously, there's a lot more to come out in court, but even Jack Abramoff reappeared last year, and he registered as a foreign agent after the fact, which is illegal, by the way. He admitted to committing a crime. It's a crime in this country to act as a foreign agent without registering or reporting to the Attorney General. It is not a crime to, he could theoretically be charged. I don't think they're going to. He registered, but, these scandals are deeply connected at the roots.
So, again, playing devil's advocate, I mean, I would argue that so let's assume that Manafort goes down, but if he has no personal knowledge as to anything that may have gone on, then so what?
Well, he has personal knowledge. He's not necessarily going to talk about it. They're going to, the whole purpose of convicting him is to cut him off from the kind of, communications access that a person with civil rights has. Once somebody is convicted of a crime, they lose their civil rights. Okay. So they're trying to weaken his position by taking away his civil rights, convicting him, jailing him. They're not going to hinder his defense, but it's still not quite the same thing.
Sure.
It's different being in pretrial detention versus being convicted. And what's going to happen is, in the second trial, they're going to prove that he was a foreign spy. FARA is a spying law, okay? I mean, it's really used primarily to, go out there and stop foreign agents from inflicting political damage in this country. And once they prove that, they've proved the collusion, in my opinion, already. I mean, this guy was getting money from, you know, Oleg Deripaska and hiding it, all right? And we already know a lot of the facts about this. We've seen this play out in public for a while. You know, there was Natalia Rybka, the Russian entertainer, who took the big boat ride with Oleg Deripaska and then put it in her book and on Instagram, and you know, pretty much like gave us a live video of Russian collusion. And just to give you a little timeline,
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote a story defining the timeline, because this is, you know, the tough thing about the Trump-Russia affair is that you have so many different levels, right? You have the people, you have the companies, you have the countries and places, then you have the political operatives, and then you have the calendar. And the calendar is really important because that tells you, like, why are they doing this? And in this case, the emails that Paul Manafort shared with Oleg Deripaska are the important ones. That's the important stuff here. He said, hey, can we get whole? Yeah. They sent Konstantin Kilimnik, their spy. I mean, he's somebody who's trained by the Russian spy agency. It is not like, there's no guesswork here. He's a Russian spy. I mean, he came here on a mission basically to help Russia. He didn't register with the Attorney General himself. You know, he got involved in American politics. He's a foreign principal himself. That's it. So once they kind of like narrow all this down and link it together, there's not a lot left to prove. But back to the timeline. So the conventions end, right? Donald Trump begs Putin for emails. Doesn't look good. His last press conference until January, by the way, it was that was his very last press conference until after the, you know, right before the inauguration. And you know, Kilimnik comes into town a few days later, has a meeting with Manafort. Then Kilimnik leaves, flies back to Russia presumably, and then like a day later, the boat ride happens. So to recap, a Russian spy meets with Paul Manafort, gets campaign information, then personally flies back to Moscow, delivers it to somebody like Deripaska or wherever he flew back to. I mean, it could be somewhere else, but it flies back to Europe. And all of a sudden, that guy decides to take a boat ride with a senior Russian official, like a government official, not just an oligarch that's on the outside, you know, with plausible deniability. And there you have it. I mean, you have your series of events. Here's 1 week where you go from meeting with Manafort to the information getting to the Kremlin through the rat line. You have the entire rat line there.
What about the Ukraine resolution? I mean, that was, I mean, he denied that there was a change in, you know, but we know that there was a change in the Ukraine resolution Republican convention. How's that in
well, you know, that's a great question. And that's something that I went over in my big Trump-Russia dossier story. The title is Trump-Russia dossier decoded. Yes, there really was a massive oil deal. You know, it's actually letter F. If you look at all the charts, it's the first chart. And the first chart really shows you kind of like the metadata. That's the idea of it, to take all the metadata from all the different stories. And it actually aggregates 26 stories over the course of a year into one single chart. And it shows you kind of, you know, how like things happened. In the beginning, the contacts were light, and then they get really heavy in the middle, and then Trump wins, and then there's a whole series of events afterwards. And that change is actually very important because it was a signal. Okay, it was a very public signal. It was a no going back from this kind of signal. And that's what you're looking for if you're, you know, Putin. You know, you're looking to have compromat. You're looking to have material that compromises your target. Okay, like, hey, we're going to make a deal, but I'm going to keep the material that says what the deal is, I'm going to tape that. I'm going to have this compromising information on you, because nobody is going to be bat an eye if Putin says, well, I'm a blackmailing, murderous dictator. That's pretty much what you expect, right? You know, nobody's going to bat an eye over that. But Trump can't stay in office if Putin puts one of these tapes out, whatever he has. And I'm sure by now he has a ton of information that's compromising, way beyond that. But during the campaign, you know, that was the thing. And you notice, like, Trump looked very upset when he begged Putin publicly to deliver Hillary Clinton's emails, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can tell you right now that, you know, he was, I think, flailing, nervous. You know, he thought that maybe he got shafted. You know, all the above. And that's what happened when, you know, he went public like that in his very last press conference of the campaign. And, you know, that's what that was all about. I mean, they denied it strenuously on every single level, in public, in private, anywhere you could. You know, and I'll tell you something else. This is something that I broke on March 5th on Occupy Democrats, and I'm going to share it for the listening and viewing audience. And I'm just going to call it Trump Russia history, because what happened is, it's a really funny story. CNN confirmed the information about the campaign platform, right? Like, CNN went out and interviewed J.D. Gordon, a man who's very close with the Hungarian regime, who was a Trump foreign campaign advisor. And J.D. Gordon was apparently in charge of that element of the convention. He was the Trump guy in the room. And, you know, they had been denying this the whole time. They'd been denying it for 9 months. So CNN did the interview, they broadcast it, and they didn't realize, they didn't put 2 and 2 together and say, oh, this is actually a huge confirmation of what's in the Trump Russia dossier, which at that point was only a couple months old. In fact, I wrote this story about 2 weeks before I wrote the big Trump Russia dossier decoded story. And we published it on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, I remember writing this story because I literally saw it, wrote it up, you know, sent it off to the editor. And then I remember sitting in my car later that day, going over changes with him, make sure we got it out right away. Because I was like, man, this is such a bombshell. We have to get it out now.
And the revelation was,
the revelation was that J.D. Gordon said Trump himself ordered the Ukraine policy change. Everybody else had been temporized. He actually revealed the truth. And a certain broadcaster on MSNBC named Rachel Maddow picked up my story, did absolutely nothing to add to it, mentioned a Politico story about Konstantin Kilimnik, the Russian spy that Paul Manafort was meeting with during the campaign. And noted the fact, you know, the timeline as well. But she really didn't do any new reporting other than what I did. And that blew up her show. That night was the night that the Russia scandal became real for America. And it was based on my reporting.
I'll be darned. So what day was that? That was
March 5th last year.
Okay.
I just tweeted it. Everybody will be able to check it out after the show. It's not a long story. It's not a deep dive, but it demonstrates for the whole world to see what Trump's position was, and that's why they did it, because it's a signal. I mean, a very important signal is to say we're in. We're with you. Okay. I mean, the Russian ambassador was there. Carter Page specifically flew to Moscow right before the convention, and then flew back, and then met with the ambassador. And, you know, if you don't mind me going off track for this question,
go ahead.
It brings up a bigger issue that we've uncovered. You see, this is something that's not being generally reported because people don't understand it. I wrote I've written 2 chapters in what I would call a book. It's, you know, we're working on the proposal. And, you know, we're calling it right now the Grand Old Putin Party. for obvious reasons. Yeah, everybody smiles when they hear that one. They're like, really?
It's cute. It's cute. I mean, after Monday and Tuesday, I mean, you certainly have to wonder. As far as I'm concerned.
After the 4th of July, I think you have to wonder. Monday and Tuesday really sealed the deal. But the first chapter of the Grand Old Putin Party was about one person, this gentleman named Dr. Edward Lozansky, who's a Western Putin apologist, and not going to tell us the whole story here. It's long. The first installment was 10,000 words long, and it involves Paul Manafort, and it involves Dana Rohrabacher. This guy was very close to Dana Rohrabacher for many, many years. Okay, but the second installment we just released, and I encourage you guys to, everybody who's watching or listening, to go to thesternfacts.com and check that out right now. It's right there at the top of the front page. The first story we released is called Republicans Helped Putin Set Up His American Lobbying Operation. Okay, which is true. This guy Lozansky is a naturalized American citizen, but he lives in Moscow full time. He's a professor in Moscow. He's been a professor there for decades. He works for a state-run university. There's a lot of backstory there. But where the rubber really meets the road, and this is the most important part, have Kislyak, right? Mm-hmm. He's your ambassador. And who does he work for? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as you go through all of the different chapters, we wrote 5 of them. It's 14,000 words. This is worth reading. It's a Sunday morning. You've got time. I'm talking to you, the people that are watching out there and listening. Definitely go there and read this, because it shows how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ran the entire operation with charts, with charts. But that's like the big takeaway from all of this, on top of the others, that, you know, people always said, yeah, you know, Ambassador Kislyak, he's like the head spy. But people didn't realize that not just the head spy, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you know, reached its tentacles out and did a lot of activities in America during the election with a lot of different people. And that was the big interface. They were spying with official cover. I mean, that's why you do that. I mean, you have official cover. If the government doesn't like it, that they know who you are. They can say you're persona non grata. This is not allowed, and they can tell you to go. But the Americans and the Russian American citizens, and, you know, the people who participated that didn't register with the Attorney General, they're all going to be on the hook. And we're starting to see these spy rings fall apart. I wrote a story about a Qatari spy ring that fell apart last week. It's the last story on that blog. That's just all investigative stories, just about all of my aggregate stories and shorter stuff and fast twitch news goes on to the Occupy Democrats site, WashingtonPress.com. Okay. And of course, yeah. I produced the Dworkin Report as well. But, you know, the spy rings fall apart, and then people have to register under FARA, and then the public finds out what they're doing. And I'm predicting that. I'm predicting that we're going to start seeing a mass registration under FARA, and we're going to really find out what happens over the course of the next 12 months. But
so let me shift gears to 2 topics that we promoted, that I promoted. And yesterday was a big day, I think. I mean, finally, the FISA application came out, and then the other issue dealing with the Russian lady, Butina, is that?
Butina.
Okay.
Maria Butina.
So let's first deal with the FISA warrant, the dossier, and
sure.
Yeah, what's going on?
Well, that's pretty straightforward. 4 different Republican appointee judges all decided that the FBI had information showing probable cause that Carter Page was a Russian spy. You know, Republicans are doing what criminal defense lawyers around the world do, except that they're supposed to be elected officials, not criminal defense lawyers. Right. So, I mean, it's really almost that simple. You know, Carter Page was known to the FBI. He passed documents to the Russians in 2013. Those Russians got arrested, put on trial and convicted, and then deported. You know, there's no question here. Carter Page has the contacts needed to do what they think he did, which is be an agent of Russia, a spy. An unregistered foreign agent is a spy. That's it. I mean, they had probable cause. There's really not a lot to argue. The only reason that we're talking about it right now is because Republicans don't have much to argue over. They got to argue whatever they can. And it's really pathetic. You know, the idea of our system, and this is a very important idea, is that anybody can say anything. The First Amendment protects you from what you say, you know, except in court when it can be used against you. You know, but it protects you from for doing a lot of things that in other places they might say, well, you disagree with the party line, we're just gonna, you know, put you in jail for disagreeing. Here we say, sure, air it out, put it everywhere. You know, if this doesn't work, you still get convicted in court. Now you can't say, well, I didn't get a chance to defend myself. I didn't get to say what I wanted to say. And here we are. So it's really not that complicated at this point. No, we talked about his role in, you know, flying to Moscow before the convention, and then all of a sudden the Ukraine thing happens. I'm sure there's a great chance that, you know, he was involved in setting that plan up. And by the way, this is my favorite part about all that. And I tweeted this out as well. I tweeted a bunch of links this morning before we started. Did you know that Carter Page, on that trip to Moscow during the summer of 2016, became the only member of either campaign, including Hillary Clinton, the only member of either campaign during the campaign period, or even like years before, like let's say from 2012 to 2016, he became the only member of the campaign that we know met with a high-ranking official who was at Uranium One, the company that they kept bringing up over and over again, because somehow Hillary Clinton, being one of 9 high officials to sign off on a really meaningless deal, we're talking about, like, you know, we're talking about a deal that just doesn't mean anything. Like, they can't export it. The mine isn't going anywhere. You know, these kind of things. We give you, you know, anything could be taken by public eminent domain, forfeiture, you name it. I mean, you buy a mine, you have to follow all the laws. If Russia breaks the laws, of which there are many, export controls, transfer controls, etc., they lose it. That's just how these things work. You can't take a mine over to Russia. They act like you can.
Yeah, right.
Carter Page met with one of the board members who concocted that deal. And to circle back a little bit, right? I don't like to circle back too much, but there's a key player that hasn't been discussed a lot here. Okay, and his name is Andrei Kiriyenko. He was the #2 man in Russia in 1998 under Boris Yeltsin. He was considered like a whiz kid back then, in his late 30s. And he was in charge of Russia when the ruble default happened in 1998, and he lost his job afterwards. And after that, Jack Abramoff brought him to America for a nice tour. We have pictures, we have, you know, itineraries, all sorts of stuff. So his political career really kind of sank after that. I mean, you know, devaluing your country's currency could do that. And Kiriyenko languished. Nobody knew what he was doing for a long time. And then he became the head of Rosatom. And he was the head of Rosatom, the nuclear energy company that bought Uranium One. And after the election, or actually right before the election in September of 2016, surprisingly, he got promoted to basically Putin's right-hand guy. He became a deputy prime minister. You know, I don't think that it's very coincidental there. You have 2 very high-ranking Uranium One officials who pulled off this deal for obviously political reasons. You know, the Russians don't need uranium from us, okay? They just don't. You know, and here you have it. Carter Page, the guy who loves to promote the Uranium One story, actually met with a very high-ranking official of Uranium One. And my story proves that he worked on that deal. So,
talk about the FISA warrant for a second.
Sure.
Trump is saying that, I mean, he's owning it, basically saying that it proves his case.
Which is total BS. It's just lying. I can tell you that the sky is green behind you, Steve. Does that make it green?
No, of course not.
But in Trump world, it might.
so
that's it. I mean, that's just it.
You know, one of the things I just happened to read this morning, and that footnote apparently wasn't a little tiny footnote, although The,
it wasn't very tiny.
No.
I mean, they call it a footnote.
Yeah.
But it's in full bold
It was a whole
print.
page.
It's not like, you know.
It was, from what I understand, I didn't see it, but, you know, what I read was that it was basically a whole page, and they disclosed that that it was a political adversary was involved.
Yeah.
And the judge, I mean, here's the thing.
It says notwithstanding the source, we believe this material.
Well,
and you know what's amazing about it? What the only thing the FISA warrant proves, it's one thing, okay? And this is like so unnecessary to go through to release the first FISA warrant in 40 years just to prove this one thing. Right. All that releasing the warrant proves, and again, most of it's redacted, so it doesn't prove everything.
Right.
But all it really proves is that Glenn Simpson was the source of the stories about it, not Christopher Steele. That's it. That's what it proves.
Would you explain that a little bit?
Well, the government says that Steele wasn't the source of the Yahoo reporting in September of 2016 that outed Carter Page. And that's it. He wasn't the source. Well, who else knew? It was Glenn Simpson. You know, not the end of the world. I mean, not like, you know, I don't think it's very important, to be honest. I mean, the FBI said it. They cut off Steele as a source because he spoke to the media after, you know, getting frustrated. I mean, he must not have known that they had gone and gotten that warrant already. They weren't going to tell him, of course. I mean, he pretty much figured they were sweeping everything under the rug. Big hint here. Did you know that the FBI is about 75% Republicans? It's got a very big Republican bias institutionally.
Sure.
It's just the fact. I'm not saying anything wrong. I mean, these people are generally registered Republicans.
Sure.
James Comey.
Yeah, I mean, you know, with
Bob Mueller.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
So the FISA warrant release is an event to me solely for historical reasons, but not for any real factual reasons, because it's all been beat to death in public over the last 6 months. And see, this is the problem with their criminal defense strategy, which is that, you know, they've been flogging these details for 6 months. Now nobody cares. Oh, the FISA warrant came out. Huh, yawn. I actually tweeted about this last night because I don't know if you remember, but Louise Mensch actually reported this FISA warrant for the first time.
Go ahead.
And,
I saw that. Yeah.
And you know, she's considered a fairly controversial figure. But what happened is I actually wrote a really, really long write-up, and I'm going to retweet this and put it at the top of my timeline. But I wrote up a really long, detailed analysis of her story, which came out on election eve. And I published it. I remember staying up until about 2 in the morning that night and publishing it. My eyes were bleeding, man. My eyes were bleeding. But I want to read a little excerpt to those who are watching, because it's pretty interesting stuff, okay? So to further complicate the story, Louise wrote, the FISA warrant was allegedly granted in part because of the involvement of one of Vladimir Putin's own daughters. Now, I'm going to stop there. That is what George Papadopoulos was told. The FISA warrant does reveal one detail that we didn't know earlier. We knew, but that wasn't so confirmed, which is that George Papadopoulos was part of the FISA warrant. It was not. It was not solely based on Carter Page. Now, to continue with my writing, I wrote, former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort is known to have multi-year known ties to the Ukrainian political parties, and the FBI leaked that he's being investigated to NBC just last week. Manafort's Ukrainian clients allegedly paid him $12.7 million off the books and are a pro-Russia party whose last president defected to Russia after a popular uprising. Ironically, Trump's fellow Republican, Senator Rand Paul, filibustered the old Patriot Act, leading to the even more ironically named USA Freedom Act, which in theory promotes more transparency about the secretive FISA warrants. Now, mind you, this is something I wrote on November 8th of 2016, but which actually gives the power of disclosure to the executive branch of government, not the judges. The next president would have political reasons both to release the FISA warrant record and also to withhold it for the very same reasons that Democrats declined the numerous disclosures of the FBI's investigation in October. In other words, to say, you want to keep these things secret because you don't want a document from the Department of Justice and all the top officials out there circulating saying that your campaign had a Russian spy. But when it's too late and you're defending yourself in court, you have to shine a light, they say. Like, this is what Giuliani said he was doing when he dropped all the bombshells about Stormy Daniels that ruined their cases there. And to finish up, however, unlike the FBI director's breach of advice and policy from the Attorney General, which allegedly violated the Hatch Act, Congress gave the FISA warrant disclosure privileges explicitly to the president. And after an election, its disclosure would not have the same partisan impact of the director's untimely disclosure, i.e. it wouldn't swing the election. But there you have it. Almost 2 years ago, I wrote that the president has the power, why that's important, why they might want to release it or not. I mean, think about that. Would Trump have released this FISA warrant if there wasn't a special counsel, if there wasn't a criminal trial coming up, if there wasn't extreme public pressure about all things Russia to rein him in and pretty much try and drive him from office for being not just too friendly with the Russians, but pretty much giving them aid and comfort? So, you know, these pictures or these situations are so complicated. They really are. I mean, you know, it boggles the mind that anybody understands it. I just happen to be a political junkie before I became a political reporter, writer, and journalist.
Now,
and a financial professional.
Right. Now, one last, Miss Butina.
Let's do it.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about her? Ask me anything about Maria Butina. I have an answer.
Okay. Well, what did she do?
What would you like to know?
What and why? And
huh?
What and why? I mean, what did she do? Why is she relevant?
So Maria Butina created the fake Russian NRA. Now, funny story about Russia. They don't like gun rights there. Okay? Gun rights are for people with badges. If you have a gun in Russia, you're a member of the military, intelligence, or police. And funny enough, she linked up with Alexander Torshin, and they petitioned the Russian, legislature to expand gun rights. Well, another funny thing about Russia: do you think that anything serious politically happens without Putin's approval, or without the approval of the government? No. I mean, this is a very captive audience, and Torshin and Butina herself are also part of his own party, which is the United Russia Party. So the very idea on its face that what these people were doing was legitimate only struck people who were Republicans, because anybody who was a Democrat or knew anything about Russia, I mean, if you just knew even the first thing about Russia, you would have said, this is nuts. Russia doesn't want more gun rights. In fact, I've seen the television interviews on Russian state-run TV where he's pressing the case for that, and the broadcasters go, "That's a crazy idea. If you gave more guns to Russian people, they'd all kill each other."
Sure. So,
but think about this: if you're Russian and you're trying to attack America, wouldn't you do it by just trying to get more guns to more people's hands? Well, that's what they did. Okay. Promoting extremism in America is exactly Russia's strategy to attack our democracy, because extremists tend to be very anti-democratic on both sides, on left and right. When you see an extremist regime, you can be guaranteed that they're either hardline communist or hardline fascist. Those are pretty much the two flavors that most of them come in. And then there's kleptocracy, which can be either one. So left-wing kleptocracy or right-wing kleptocracy.
So why was she indicted?
So she was indicted for being a Russian spy, being a political agent of a foreign nation. Yeah. Okay, being a political agent of a foreign nation in America without registering first with the Attorney General is a crime, and she conspired to do it with others. She's facing 15 years. But what she did was she wormed her way into the NRA, right? And this is a way of the Russians getting intelligence. But based on all of the things that I've read, she didn't just gather intelligence, she was also directing money, resources. You know, she was providing something of value to the members of the NRA that they were using politically. All right, and that's also, it's illegal to accept anything of value in a federal campaign from a foreign person or foreign government. So, you know, she could have registered as a foreign lobbyist, and then, you know, what would have happened? Well, the FBI would have known about her. And, you know, somebody from the FBI might have lifted the phone and called up, you know, the head of the NRA and said, do you know that you have a registered Russian agent floating around inside all of your meetings?
So what?
And they might have said, this could be a problem, but she didn't. So that's why she's been arrested.
So what value did she distribute?
Oh man, I mean, the NRA was the single largest pro-Trump group.
Sure, the first, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, you know, I'm going to publish the first chapter of the grand old Putin party story, so that, you know, that our watchers and listeners can check that out too, because it actually gets into that. You know, I wrote about this last year. I don't think I really spotlighted Butina last year because she was important, but she wasn't as important as like Torsion, for example. Maybe I did. I mean, I just said even the NRA suddenly changed into a pro-Putin group after some targeted reporting with love from Russia's fake NRA. Okay, it was just like, you know, hey, we know about this too, but I didn't write the big story on it. This year I actually wrote the big story on it.
Is the issue that she probably through the grace of Putin sent money somehow to candidates running for office through the NRA? Is that?
Yes. I mean, look. You have to know.
I mean, is
what
that
it says in the warrant is explicit. What it says is that they had a back channel for communications to campaigns, to candidates through the NRA.
Okay.
And why is that important? I mean, have you noticed that everything that they're doing is to set up communications back channels? Well, by the law, outside expenditure groups are not allowed to coordinate with campaigns, right? So her mere presence as a communicator would have been a great assistance to violate federal campaign laws, you know, which is to say, I'm going to talk to you, you talk to them. Okay, except that she was acting as the man in the middle, so to speak, for a Russian, you know, for a foreign government. Wow. But I mean, the importance of what she did, a communications back channel, she probably helped them coordinate. The idea behind the coordination rules, which the Supreme Court really thought actually are enforceable, they're plainly not. The idea was that, well, you know, if I'm out there spending $100 million of my own money, and somebody send that to me so I can spend it. if I'm spending $100 million, and there's that campaign spending 10 million or 50 million, let's say, you know, there's a chance that we're going to duplicate efforts, or maybe my message is not going to work for this campaign, right? Like, hey, you spend all you want, but, you know, if I'm messaging that, you know, ICE needs to be abolished, and you're messaging that Trump needs to be abolished, well, maybe the conflicting messages won't work out, and it'll blunt the impact of the spending. That's the theory. Okay, the practice is that the United States doesn't have any thought police. It doesn't. We don't, and our political enforcement mechanisms are not just weak, they're non-existent. I mean, you have to be a jerk like Ted Cruz for the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC, to rule against you 6-0. I mean, it has to be so just black and white on its face. There's a mechanism, and it's very rarely used, but there's a mechanism if the FEC punts on a case that, you know, it can be taken to court. It's very rare. I think it's worked once. You know, obviously, all this stuff needs a major overhaul, and it needs enforcement mechanisms that can be used in real time. Because here we are 2 years later debating what happened in this election 2 years ago, and we know that there's a bunch of illegal things that happen, and look at how long it takes to enforce it. And once the person cheats in the election, now they're in the public office. They can do whatever they intended to do. So if the goal of the election laws is to prevent abuse, they failed. Okay, and these things should be deterrent, because you're talking about lawyers and professionals who are running for office, not, yeah, and political operatives, and people that should know better. Okay, I mean, the handbook is not that long. The FEC handbook is fairly short. The deterrent is not there. And punishing after the fact doesn't really apply the full amount of punishment. It punishes the American people who have been conned by these cheaters. It gives them years to get their stuff together. And then at the end of the day, it gives them the biggest platform for defense there is. And the Trump Foundation story is a great example of that. $2.8 million in-kind donation. We've known about this for 2 years. Has the FEC done anything? Nope. Okay, the state of New York built a methodical case. They're going to take it to trial, civil trial at the end of the year. And then once they do that, they're going to establish the facts, as I was saying earlier. They're going to establish that there was an illegal campaign contribution. They're going to establish legal campaign coordination between the charity and the campaign. They're going to establish all of that. And then let's see if there's some federal or criminal charges in the state level that result from that. So, I mean, what was Butina doing? She was doing everything to help the Republican Party and Donald Trump cheat, to violate election laws, like a lot of them. I mean, the foreign laws, the coordination laws, perhaps funneling money into the campaign or into spending for the campaign. And something I pointed out, and I'll leave it at this. Something I pointed out in the large deep dive story that we did about Torsion and Butina and released 3 weeks ago before she was indicted. Something really stood out, and so we wrote it in there, which is that Scott Walker is one of a handful of candidates that received a lot of money from a Russian-American oligarch. His name is Len Blavatnik. He came here in 1989. He got a Harvard degree. He was central to the Harvard Project corruption in the mid-1990s that created the Russian oligarch class. In fact, it caught a Russian professor at Harvard investing into his business, which led to a $30+ million settlement from Harvard to the U.S. federal government in 2001. And Blavatnik donated a lot of money, a whole lot of money, to Scott Walker. He gave him $1.5 million for his presidential run and gave him $350,000 for his political 527 group. Those are political nonprofits. That's direct money that he controls. And in fact, all those photographs come from that group, Our American Revival, I think it is. But all of those photographs that I published, that you see people publishing, came from that group. And I went into archive and I started looking through the photo slideshow, and he must have left the photos on the server because I was able before to get them from that slideshow. Now they're gone. But they were in the slideshow, and he probably didn't realize it. He deleted those pages from his website entirely. But it shows you how here you have Butina and Torsion meeting with a politician. They're at his campaign launch. They're at the NRA meetings with him. Then he gets a gusher $2 million from Russian folks.
Wow.
And the biggest thrust, the biggest thrust of the second chapter of our grand old Putin party story is this: that this fellow, Dr. Lozansky, Edward Lozansky, wrote a book in 2003 on behalf of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They published it. I mean, they were his publisher. And the book was called On Building an Ethnic Lobby, a Russian-American ethnic lobby, basically. Like, how do we make Russians into an ethnic lobby in the United States? This is something that Nixon did in the 1970s as well. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, Nixon is one of the reasons why all this foreign campaign finance law was put in place. You know, people remember Watergate, but the laws got put in place to stop everything he did, which included a lot of foreign interference in the election. And on reflection, I can tell you right now, Nixon was a much smarter guy than Trump, much more in control than Trump, politics better, etc.
He was also an attorney, so
probably. But I believe firmly that he compromised himself with that the foreign assistance that he received, and that's where you get the Nixon. Only Nixon could go to China. I'm surprised that Republicans weren't saying only Trump can go to North Korea.
Well, that's
I hate to tell you, I got to interrupt myself to put one more thing out there.
Sure.
This is not, that last thing wasn't the last thing. This is really the last thing.
Okay.
So the last thing is our story about Butina and Torsion and this fellow Dr. Lozansky is very, very important for one reason. It shows the roots of infiltration of the NRA. People don't know about this guy Lozansky, but he is in the media. NPR just quoted him last week from Moscow. He's in BBC pretty frequently. You know, he's been in a lot of major news outlets here. He is all over Russian state television. Okay, he's probably the one American that most average Russians would know about, and of course, he's a Kremlin apologist. So Dr. L held a meeting with Alexander Torshin in 2009 to set up a visit to the United States in 2010 for political reasons. That should have triggered a FARA registration right there. But for whatever reason, he lulled the American authorities to sleep about what he was really doing. And we found that visit and that meeting and them writing, here it is on our website, we're doing this to set up a political event in the United States, on the Russian Operation Council website. And it's in our story. Well, Torshin showed up and he went to the National Prayer Breakfast. You know, they noted that Butina went to one in 2017. Hint, we put pictures of it in our story 3 weeks ago. But they noted that Torshin had, and this is a good timeline to follow, he tried to interact with Sarah Palin. It failed, okay, in 2009. The next thing that happened, Lozansky meets with him. In April of 2010, the next event in the timeline is he goes to the National Prayer Breakfast. I don't know why that hasn't been fully, you know, I've been talking with MSNBC. I don't know why they haven't brought us on to reveal all of this. But this is what he said, according to Google Translate. The translation's a little, you know, sketch, but you'll get the idea, okay? Such a breakfast, Torshin said, is not a formally binding discussion. There you do not need to take decisions. You can just exchange opinions and find common ground on some sensitive issues, he stressed. At the same time, Torshin drew attention to the fact that although the event is called breakfast, food is not its purpose.
Oh, okay.
By itself, breakfast is eggs and tea. That's all, Torshin explained.
We have to end. Listen, I really think it was so much information, and what we'll do is we'll cut it into excerpts, and
Sure.
you can help me with some of these Russian names, and we'll get this out. Thank you again. I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to push some buttons. Bear with me.